The morning began like any other at Bezos Expeditions headquarters in Seattle, until an emergency call from the finance division fractured the calm. A transaction flagged by auditors showed a $250 million transfer to a private fund in Singapore, labeled Strategic Investment Aurora Dynamics. The signatures were authentic, the approvals clean, and the authorization carried the name that made it unquestionable: Jeff Bezos. But within minutes, that confidence began to crumble. The receiving company couldn't be located in any registry. Its supposed CEO didn't exist. And the man responsible for overseeing the deal, the one Bezos once described as my most disciplined advisor, had vanished. His name was Marcus Vale, and for nearly a decade, he had been the quiet architect behind Bezos's personal wealth strategy. Now, every trace of his network was disappearing, like a digital tide erasing footprints from sand. By midday, the headlines were everywhere. Bezos' advisor disappears with $250 million. Analysts called it the most sophisticated betrayal in corporate history. Not a hack, not an external breach, but a collapse from within. The story shook Silicon Valley, not because of the money, but because of who it happened to. Jeff Bezos, the man who built a trillion-dollar empire on precision and data, had been deceived by someone who understood those principles better than anyone. Inside Bezos Expeditions, executives pored over encrypted emails, contracts, and signatures, all flawless. It wasn't fraud born of chaos, it was order used as a weapon. By the time investigators traced the first offshore account, the realization had already settled in. The system hadn't failed. It had followed its rules perfectly, under the control of the wrong man. And as the financial world tried to comprehend how the most disciplined empire in modern capitalism could be undone by a single advisor, one truth echoed through every boardroom. When trust becomes a system, betrayal becomes strategy. To understand how Jeff Bezos could lose $250 million to the man he trusted most, you have to understand the empire he built. The empire of order. From Amazon to Blue Origin to Bezos Expeditions, everything in his world was engineered for one purpose: control. Bezos was not a man who relied on instinct. He relied on precision. Every decision, every projection, every movement of capital was measured, tracked, and recorded. His power came from structure, not sentiment. He believed chaos was simply an equation not yet solved, and he had spent 3 decades proving that discipline could outthink disorder. His personal office operated like a command center. Spreadsheets replaced emotion. Meetings ran on algorithms of logic. Even his private investments were designed to behave like his warehouses: fast, efficient, and impossible to corrupt. But that belief, that unshakable confidence in systems, was the flaw that would eventually undo him. Bezos didn't fear betrayal because he believed systems can't betray, only people do. And in his mind, systems built by disciplined people were immune to corruption. He forgot that systems are only as clean as the humans who designed them. Over time, the empire of order became its own illusion. The more flawlessly it functioned, the more its creator stopped questioning it. Psychologists call this disciplinary blindness, the point where structure replaces scrutiny. Bezos no longer doubted because the numbers had never lied to him before. But numbers don't need to lie when someone controls where they come from. That was the world Marcus Vale stepped into, a machine so perfectly predictable that one who understood its rhythm could play it like music. Vale didn't need to hack it. He just needed to conduct it. And Bezos, surrounded by efficiency, never noticed the silence where skepticism used to live. His empire didn't collapse from disorder. It began to erode from the perfection that no longer feared imperfection. His name was Marcus Vale, a man who could walk into any room and lower the volume without saying a word. He was 43, a graduate of Wharton, and once a mid-level strategist at Goldman Sachs before the culture of noise and greed pushed him away. Vale believed in stillness. He called it the quiet leverage. He didn't sell ideas. He positioned them, slowly, deliberately, until others believed they were their own. When he joined Bezos Expeditions in 2014, no one paid much attention. He wasn't flashy, didn't dress like a billionaire's confidant, didn't crave headlines. But over time, his silence became authority. He spoke in data, not in ego. To people who worked around Jeff Bezos, Vale seemed like the human version of the systems Bezos worshipped. Measured, efficient, unemotional. That resemblance made him invaluable. He managed the private investment arm of Bezos' empire, overseeing the flow of billions between startups, green ventures, and philanthropic foundations. His reports were immaculate. No red flags, no errors, no emotion. Within 2 years, Bezos was calling him my filter against chaos. But beneath that calm, something darker was forming, a philosophy born not from greed, but from observation. Vale admired Bezos' genius, but saw its flaw. Systems breed blindness, he once told a colleague over dinner. When people believe a machine can't lie, they stop checking who's writing the code. That sentence would later appear in an FBI transcript. What no one knew was that Vale had begun constructing his own system inside Bezos's. Using shell accounts, investment subsidiaries, and ESG reporting tools, he started mapping how money moved through the structure. Every rule, every authorization, every weakness. His genius wasn't financial, it was psychological. He understood how Bezos thought, how he trusted, how he verified, and he mirrored it. To gain complete access, he didn't demand control, he earned it, transaction by transaction, building a decade-long reputation so clean that it became invisible. Vale wasn't motivated by resentment or need. He had everything: power, prestige, and proximity to the world's most methodical mind. What he wanted was something far more dangerous: validation. He wanted to prove that no system, no matter how disciplined, could ever transcend the human flaws it was built on. And to prove that, he would use the one man who embodied that belief, Jeff Bezos himself. He didn't just study Bezos' empire, he rehearsed it. Every process, every approval chain, every mental shortcut Bezos relied on. By the time the trap was set, Vale wasn't imitating the architect anymore. He had become the system's reflection, flawless, trusted, and entirely synthetic. Trust was never given freely inside Bezos Expeditions. It had to be earned in layers. Marcus Vale understood that perfectly. He didn't chase it, he engineered it. Each quarter, his reports arrived earlier, cleaner, and more precise than anyone else's. When Bezos questioned a figure, Vale already had the explanation, complete with supporting data and predictive graphs. He became indispensable, not because he knew everything, but because he made Bezos believe that he did. Over time, their conversations shifted from markets to meaning. Vale started attending private retreats at Blue Origin's launch complex in West Texas, where Bezos discussed philosophy, risk, and the psychology of decision-making. It was there, away from cameras and balance sheets, that the transformation began. Bezos saw in Vale a reflection of his own discipline. They spoke the same language: efficiency, structure, control. To the outside world, Vale was just a financial advisor. To insiders, he was the architect behind the architect. When Bezos began developing his philanthropic climate initiatives, it was Vale who proposed a new investment vehicle, something leaner, quieter, immune to bureaucracy. Money is like water, Vale said in one meeting. It doesn't disappear, it just needs better channels. Bezos nodded. That sentence became policy. By 2020, Vale was no longer just managing numbers. He was managing trust itself. He reviewed acquisitions, coordinated with private equity partners, and quietly shaped the flow of capital between Bezos' personal fund, Blue Origin, and Amazon's innovation arm. Few realized how much authority he now held. He didn't boast, didn't overstep. He simply became the mechanism everyone relied on. In a structure designed to eliminate error, Vale positioned himself as the one variable no one questioned. Their bond was built on efficiency, but underneath it pulsed something deeper: dependence. Bezos once said to a colleague, "Marcus makes complexity feel like gravity, constant, invisible, necessary." It was meant as praise, but it was also prophecy, because the moment trust stops being evaluated, it starts being assumed. And assumed trust, in the hands of the wrong mind, becomes power without oversight. The plan began not with deception, but with discipline. Marcus Vale didn't steal from Jeff Bezos by breaking the rules, he rewrote them. The project he proposed was called Aurora Dynamics, a next-generation climate tech fund designed to accelerate green innovation through data-driven investment. The language was perfect, philanthropic yet profitable, scientific yet human. It fits seamlessly within Bezos' new vision of sustainable capitalism. Vale's proposal suggested using a network of offshore structures to increase liquidity and regulatory flexibility, all standard practice for international impact funds. Bezos Expeditions approved it without hesitation. The paperwork was flawless, the audits independent, the due diligence transparent. Every document, every signature, every email trace led to a web of authenticity Vale had spent 3 years constructing. Behind the curtain, the architecture was pure art. Vale had created 3 shell entities: Orion Capital Partners, Singapore, Apex Global Trust, Cayman Islands, and Helios Advisory, Dubai, each one appearing legitimate, each one owning the next in a loop of jurisdictional invisibility. The beauty of it was that nothing he did looked illegal. Aurora Dynamics existed on paper, had a functioning website, ESG certifications, and even staged photographs of clean energy research facilities that were nothing more than leased warehouses lit for a day-long photo shoot. The money trail unfolded slowly, predictably. Between 2019 and 2022, Bezos approved a total of $250 million in staged tranches, each labeled as Renewable Energy Development Capital. The transfers moved through Bezos' family office in Seattle into Orion's account in Singapore, then onward through Apex and Helios, before landing in a web of crypto hedge funds and real estate holdings across Zurich and Monaco. The real genius wasn't in how Vale stole, it was in how he concealed it. He didn't hide in darkness, he hid in transparency. The reports he sent back to Bezos were immaculate: detailed projections, audited returns, and glowing endorsements from partner institutions that existed only as email addresses hosted on servers he controlled. Even the accountants were blindfolded. Their numbers matched because Vale ensured they did. He had built a perfect feedback loop, an empire of confirmation where truth and verification became the same thing. When an analyst once asked about the absence of Aurora's public filings, Vale smiled and said, "Impact funds move quietly. Real progress doesn't need applause." The line became gospel within the office. Every month, he sent Bezos performance summaries that projected steady returns. Never too high, never too low, perfectly believable. Psychologically, it was a masterstroke. Musk was seduced by confidence. Buffett was disarmed by morality. But Bezos was conquered by order. Vale had discovered that the easiest way to deceive a man who distrusts chaos is to give him flawless control. By mid-2022, the $250 million had completed its silent journey, buried inside a constellation of holding companies and encrypted accounts that only one man understood. When the system finally noticed, it wouldn't collapse from irregularity, it would collapse from perfection. Because perfection was the lie Vale sold best. He didn't steal Bezos' money. He stole his certainty. It started with a whisper, not a warning. In April 2023, a junior analyst inside Bezos' family office flagged an anomaly, a duplicate portfolio entry worth $42 million under a company called Aurora Dynamics, with identical metrics but a different valuation. The discovery spread quietly through the compliance team. When Jeff Bezos was informed, he dismissed it at first. "Probably a clerical error," he said, without looking up from his tablet. But within hours, the data refused to reconcile. 2 identical investment paths, 2 sets of financial statements, both verified by the same digital signatures. By evening, the office that once operated like a metronome was trembling. Files disappeared from secure servers. Archived emails returned access denied. The illusion was beginning to collapse. By dawn, Bezos' expeditions had activated a full forensic audit. The deeper they dug, the more impossible it became to separate real from replica. Orion Capital Partners, Apex Global Trust, and Helios Advisory, the pillars of Vale's empire, each led to empty shells and terminated domains. It was as if the architecture of order had turned against itself, eating its own foundation. Bezos watched the investigators trace transactions across Singapore, Cayman, and Dubai, each transfer bouncing perfectly within the system he'd approved. The betrayal wasn't sloppy, it was surgical. Every document bore his own authorization. Every dollar obeyed the rules he had written. The loss totaled $250 million, but the damage went deeper. Marcus Vale had vanished. His apartment in Seattle was clean, his phone wiped, his devices destroyed. For days, it seemed as though the man had never existed. Then, a break. An encrypted transfer from Zurich to Geneva triggered an alert at Credit Suisse. Vale was arrested at Geneva Airport, attempting to board a private jet bound for Monaco, carrying 3 laptops and an encrypted drive containing fragments of the missing funds. When confronted, he said only one sentence: "You trusted the map, not the man drawing it." Bezos never appeared publicly during the investigation. Insiders described him as calm, detached, almost clinical. "He didn't raise his voice," one aide said. "He just looked recalibrated." Because for Jeff Bezos, the revelation wasn't that someone had stolen from him, it was that someone had used his own perfection to do it. The crime that shook Jeff Bezos was not about money, it was about reflection. Marcus Vale had not simply stolen $250 million, he had stolen a philosophy. For years, Bezos had lived by a single creed: discipline defeats chaos. He believed that by eliminating emotion, one could eliminate error. But Vale understood something Bezos didn't, that order can become its own form of blindness. He knew that in a world obsessed with precision, the easiest lie to tell is the one that looks perfect. Psychologists call it systemic mimicry, the ability to replicate trust so precisely that it becomes indistinguishable from truth. Vale mastered it. He didn't challenge Bezos' authority, he mirrored it. He didn't fight his systems, he became them. And because he never broke a rule, no alarm was ever triggered. In many ways, Vale was Bezos' shadow, the embodiment of what happens when intelligence evolves without empathy. He admired the empire Bezos built, but he also resented its certainty. To him, Bezos represented a world that believed intelligence could replace conscience. Vale wanted to prove that logic without humility was no safer than chaos. He once wrote in a private note later found by investigators, "He thinks perfection protects him. I will show him that perfection is the softest target of all." Those words revealed not greed, but ideology. Vale saw himself as a correction, not a criminal. He didn't steal because he wanted wealth. He stole because he wanted acknowledgement. Bezos, for his part, suffered from a bias shared by all architects of order: disciplinary hubris. The more efficient his system became, the less he believed it could be manipulated. The very thing that made him a visionary, his unshakable belief in data, systems, and structure, had become the weakness that Vale exploited. It wasn't betrayal from the outside, it was implosion from within. 2 men, equally brilliant, separated only by intention. One used logic to control the world, the other used it to expose control's illusion. When asked later about the ordeal, Bezos said only, "I built systems to prevent mistakes. I didn't realize they could prevent awareness too." That single sentence summarized everything. Logic can prevent error, but it cannot predict deceit. Intelligence without vulnerability becomes arrogance, and arrogance, left unchecked, builds its own downfall. Vale didn't destroy Bezos' world. He revealed it, a flawless empire so obsessed with control that it forgot the only thing it could never automate: doubt. Months after Marcus Vale's arrest, the empire of Jeff Bezos appeared untouched. The rockets still launched, the warehouses still hummed, and the numbers still climbed. But those close to him said something had shifted, not in his fortune, but in his faith. The man who once trusted systems more than people had begun to rebuild his world from the inside out. Within Bezos' expeditions, he introduced a new framework called the Integrity Protocol, a doctrine requiring two-man verification for every major transaction and quarterly psychological audits for senior executives. It wasn't about preventing theft anymore, it was about reintroducing doubt. Doubt, Bezos told his board, isn't inefficiency, it's maintenance for truth. Marcus Vale was sentenced to 20 years in federal custody after confessing to international financial fraud. At his hearing, he addressed Bezos directly. "You created the safest system in the world. I just wanted to see if it was human." He smiled when he said it. That line echoed across newsrooms and documentaries for months, dissected by analysts as both arrogance and philosophy. To Bezos, it was neither, it was confirmation. The system hadn't failed because it was weak, it failed because it believed it couldn't. In the years that followed, Bezos grew quieter. His interviews became shorter, his tone more measured. He spoke less about efficiency and more about awareness, about the cost of assuming that control is the same as understanding. When asked if he forgave Vale, he replied, "You don't forgive gravity for pulling you down. You learn where not to step." For most, the scandal ended with a conviction. For Crumbling Thrones, it became a parable about how the strongest empires fall not from betrayal, but from belief in their own perfection. Because power built on precision eventually forgets its origin, imperfection. And in that forgetfulness, even the most disciplined empire becomes fragile. The lesson of Jeff Bezos was simple and brutal. In the pursuit of control, trust must never stop being afraid.